So Resident Evil 9 is out, and it looks absolutely incredible. But maybe you're broke, maybe you're waiting for a sale, or maybe you just finished it already and you need something to fill that void. Today I'm talking about 15 games that scratch that exact same itch. Survival horror, tight resource management, creepy atmosphere. Some of these you definitely heard of. Some of them are criminally slept on. Let's get into it. Kicking things off with one that almost nobody has played, and that needs to change. Them and Us is a throwback survival horror game built almost entirely in the spirit of classic Resident Evil. Tank controls, limited inventory, puzzles, the whole deal. Now look, it's rough. It was made by a tiny team and it shows in places. But if you have any love for that old school Resident Evil style of horror, there's a genuine charm here that's surprisingly hard to shake. The atmosphere is there, the tension is there, and the sheer ambition of what this small team pulled off deserves real respect. Don't sleep on it just because it flew under the radar. Daymare 1998 is another one wearing its Resident Evil inspiration right on its sleeve, but this one's got a bit more polish to it. It's a third-person survival horror game set in a small American town hit by a viral outbreak, and the core gameplay loop is genuinely satisfying. What really stands out is the inventory system. You have to manually reload your magazines, which sounds like a small thing but adds this layer of tension that most games just don't bother with. The story gets a little messy and the voice acting has its moments, let's say, but when the game gets it right, it really gets it right. If you're deep in that classic Resident Evil headspace and you've already burned through everything else, Daymare is absolutely worth your time. Alright, this one's brand new and already doing some really interesting things with the genre. Chrysal, Theater of Idols is a first-person survival horror game published by Blumhouse Games. Yes, the horror movie people, set in a nightmarish twisted version of Spain filled with grotesque living statues and dark religious iconography. The standout mechanic is that your blood is your ammunition. Every time you reload your weapons, you drain your own health bar, which turns every combat encounter into a tense risk versus reward decision that keeps you on edge constantly. There's also an unkillable stalker enemy that hunts you through the streets in a way that'll remind you straight away of Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. It's not a flawless game, but the atmosphere is genuinely stunning, and the ideas it brings to the table make it feel unlike almost anything else in the genre right now. If you want something fresh and you've already burned through the bigger names on this list, Chrysal is absolutely worth your time. Here's one that genuinely baffles me that more people haven't played. Tormented Souls is a pure, unapologetic, old-school survival horror game. Fixed cameras, real puzzles, tight resource management, set inside a deeply creepy abandoned hospital. The puzzles are clever, the monster design is unsettling in a really effective way, and the atmosphere is thick from the moment you start. What's crazy is that the production quality here is way higher than you'd expect from a small indie team. It's clear these developers grew up loving classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill and poured every bit of that love into this thing. If you consider yourself a fan of this genre and you haven't played Tormented Souls yet, that's something you need to fix immediately. Now here's something a little different. Crow Country is a survival horror game that deliberately looks like it was made for the PS1. Low poly visuals, retro aesthetic, and it's set inside an abandoned theme park, which is already a great setup. What makes it work so well is how effectively it builds atmosphere without relying on cheap tricks. It's quiet and eerie in this slow burn way that genuinely gets under your skin. The puzzles are satisfying, the pacing is really tight, and the whole experience never overstays its welcome. It's on the shorter side, but it's focused and confident in a way that a lot of bigger games aren't. Great entry point if you're newer to the genre, and a really fun ride if you're a veteran. Madison is a first-person psychological horror game, and it goes to some genuinely dark, uncomfortable places. You play as a teenager who wakes up covered in blood with no memory of what happened, and things escalate from there in some really disturbing directions. The standout mechanic is a Polaroid camera you use to photograph things and reveal hidden elements of the world, and it's one of the more creative and effective horror mechanics I've seen in recent memory. The sound design is excellent, and the atmosphere is consistently oppressive throughout. It's not a flawless game, but when Madison decides it wants to scare you, it commits fully and it works. Definitely one worth checking out if you want something that leans hard into psychological horror. Post-Trauma is relatively new, and it's already got the survival horror community talking, which tells you something. It's heavily inspired by classic Silent Hill and early Resident Evil, drops you into a nightmare world with minimal handholding, and just lets the dread build naturally. The fixed camera angles are back, the atmosphere is dense and suffocating, and the creature design is the kind of stuff that sticks in your head after you put the controller down. The mystery unfolds slowly and uncomfortably in a way that feels very deliberate and very effective. If you've been waiting for something that genuinely captures what made the classic era of survival horror so special, Post-Trauma is one of the most exciting things to come out of the indie scene in a while. Signalis is one of those games that reminds you exactly why the indie scene matters. It's a sci-fi survival horror game with a pixel art aesthetic that draws from classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but tells a story that is entirely its own, melancholic, strange, and genuinely haunting in a way that stays with you. The inventory is tight and deliberate, the combat is tense, and the puzzle design is excellent throughout, but it's really the story and the atmosphere that push it to another level entirely. Signalis is the kind of game you finish and immediately want to talk to someone about, because it leaves you sitting with a lot. If you consider yourself a serious fan of this genre and you haven't played it, that needs to change today. Now, this one's a bit of a surprise and look. It had a rough launch and got buried pretty quickly under mixed reviews. But there is a genuinely interesting game underneath all of that if you give it a chance. It's got David Harbour and Jodie Comer, and both performances are actually really strong. The story goes for this atmospheric Southern Gothic tone that feels completely unique in gaming, and the environments are gorgeous. Yes, the combat is clunky and the pacing stumbles in places, and those are real criticisms. But the overall vibe and the commitment to atmosphere set it apart from a lot of what else is out there. If you appreciate horror that prioritizes mood and setting over pure action, Alone in the Dark is worth a look. Chronos, The New Dawn is from Bloober Team, the same people behind the Silent Hill 2 remake, and if that name means anything to you, you already know this one is worth paying attention to. It's a brand new sci-fi horror adventure, heavily inspired by Dead Space, but set on a devastated future Earth that is genuinely gross and unsettling in all the right ways. The combat is solid, the survival horror elements are well crafted, and the difficulty is surprisingly punishing, more so than you'd probably expect going in. But along with that challenge comes a story that's actually worth following and an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife. If you played the Resident Evil 4 remake, and you've been hunting for that next third-person survival horror fix ever since, Chronos, The New Dawn might be exactly what you've been looking for. If the first one felt a little rough around the edges, The Evil Within 2 is where the series really hits its stride. It takes everything from the original and refines it across the board. Better pacing, more varied horror, and a story with a real emotional core this time. Sebastian is searching for his daughter, and that grounded human motivation gives the whole thing a weight the first game didn't quite have. The world opens up into semi-open areas between the linear set pieces, and that balance works really well. The Evil Within 2 is one of those rare sequels that genuinely surpasses the original in almost every way. Honestly, play both. But if you only have time for one, this is the one. Alan Wake 2 is not your traditional survival horror game, but make no mistake, it absolutely belongs on this list. Remedy built something completely unprecedented here. A survival horror game that's also a meta-narrative, psychological thriller about storytelling itself, and somehow it all works. It's weird, it's ambitious, it's stunning to look at, and it constantly subverts your expectations in ways that feel genuinely earned. Saga Anderson's investigation chapters and Alan's dark surreal nightmare world play off each other brilliantly throughout. Alan Wake 2 is the kind of game that only comes around once in a generation, and if you've been sleeping on it, now is the time. Play it with headphones, play it in the dark, and enjoy being completely unsettled from start to finish. Few games carry as much weight as Silent Hill 2. The original is widely considered one of the greatest horror games ever made, so when Bloober Team announced the remake, the internet held its breath. And then it came out and it was genuinely great. Everything that made the original so psychologically devastating is preserved here, while the gameplay has been modernized in ways that actually enhance the experience rather than dilute it. James Sunderland's journey into Silent Hill is still one of the most disturbing, emotionally complex stories in all of gaming, and this remake does it complete justice. It's a rare case where a remake can stand proudly right alongside the source material. If you have even a passing interest in horror, you owe it to yourself to play this. I'm putting these two together because both of them are essential and you really can't talk about one without the other. The original Dead Space is a genre-defining masterpiece, third-person sci-fi survival horror on a doomed space station, absolutely dripping with tension from the first minutes. The 2023 remake takes that same masterpiece and elevates it with stunning visuals, completely overhauled audio design, and a more fleshed-out Isaac Clarke, while keeping everything that made the original so iconic completely intact. Dismembering necromorphs is still one of the most satisfying gameplay loops in horror gaming, full stop. If you haven't played either version, the remake is the definitive way to do it. And if you have, honestly, it's worth going back. Look, if you can't play Resident Evil 9 right now, the best thing you can possibly do is go back and play the game that set the standard for modern survival horror remakes. Resident Evil 2 Remake is an absolute masterpiece. It took a beloved classic and rebuilt it from the ground up into something that feels completely modern while never losing what made the original special. Leon and Claire's campaigns are brilliantly designed, Mr. Brilliantly designed. X stalking you through the police station is one of the most tense and memorable horror experiences in gaming, and the overall production quality is just off the charts. If you love Resident Evil 9, this is essentially where that era of Resident Evil began. And if somehow you haven't played it yet, well, there's your number one, and that's the list. 15 games to hold you over until you can get your hands on Resident Evil 9, or just to play alongside it. Let me know your picks down in the comments. I read all of them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.